This is Metal Mike, and in this episode of the 80's Glam Metalcast, we talk to the bassist from Badlands and Kings of Dust, Greg Chaisson. We get in depth about his new band, Kings of Dust. We hear some classic stories about Badlands from the past. Stay tuned for the end of the episode where I give my review of the Kings of Dust album. Check it out. Welcome to the 80's Glam Metalcast, Greg. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well.
Awesome. So, you've got a new band together called Kings of Dust. You guys have posted some samples on YouTube. Sounds great. What do you want to tell everybody about it?
Buy the record.
When's it coming out, Greg?
I think the actual hard release is March 13th. There was a pre-order program that we had done, and we probably sold, I don't know what the number is, but it's somewhere north of 800 hard CDs. So it's not going to be downloadable for a while because you don't make any money at it. And we paid for this thing ourselves, so we're paying ourselves back.
I've been listening to it on YouTube, especially your song "Like a Ocean." I really like it, man.
Yeah.
It's definitely got like a 70s, 80s vibe, you know, kind of more similar to Badlands. I mean, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of 70s riff rock sort of thing, reminiscent of any of the bands, the heavier bands from the late 70s or even early 70s, you know, whether it's Humble Pie or Mountain or any Zeppelin or Sabbath. So our influences are pretty obvious without, you know, downright thievery. And so it's just it's got a real 70s vibe, a very 70s production where you can actually hear everything. And oddly enough, I wasn't concerned about the radio, but the song has been getting some airplay across the country, and it's actually doing really well. So I didn't write anything that would, you know, intentionally be commercial. I just kind of write what I like, and it's, so far the response has been really good.
Your vocalist voice, he kind of reminds me of Ian Gillan a little bit.
You know, I hear that. I hear Ian Gillan, and I also hear Jeff Tate. People tell me, oddly enough, to me, he doesn't sound like anybody, which is one of the reasons I like him. But people hear what they want to hear. But he's a really great vocalist, and he's a great lyricist. So his lyrics are, you know, not just on the well-worn path of everyone else type thing. He really kind of goes in some different directions, which I enjoy.
Now, did you take care of the music duties of writing, or did you write lyrics as well, or does he do all that?
He writes the lyrics, and the music is written, probably the lion's share of it is written by me, but when I come in, I'll then, with a song or whatever, then the guitarist, Ryan McKay, excellent guitarist, and the drummer, Jimmy Taft, one of my favorite drummers, they throw in their ideas as well, and we just kind of turn it into however I had it originally in my mind. It usually ends up being that good or better, and it can sometimes go in some other directions as well. So we're very, you know, my influences are everything from classic rock to blues to country to some funk to heavy metal to hard rock. So all of that is kind of represented in what it is we do, and everyone else's influences are that varied as well.
Well, you talk about influences. Who are some of your influences as a bass player? Because when I listen to your bass playing, I mean, it's very distinct. It definitely, you know, you seem to be in that 70s pocket where you're kind of climbing around on the bass. But I like the fact, too, that you'll rock out complicated riffs, especially like on the Badlands stuff. So who are some of your influences?
My first main influence would probably have been a guy named Martin Turner from band Wishbone Ash, British band, and then Tim Bogert when he was in Cactus, and then John Entwistle from The Who, John Paul Jones, Geezer, Greg Ridley from Humble Pie, Felix Pappalardi in Mountain, Andy Fraser from Free. If you took about 20 bass players from the 70s and mixed them all up, I'm kind of a little bit of all of them. I don't really play exactly like anyone, and I play a little bit like a lot of people.
Well, you know,
and I am a busy bass player. I mean, the way that I hear music, whether it was with Badlands or Kings of Dust or anything I did before that time to what Badlands or Red Dragon Cartel, and then stuff that I had done prior to that, and all the way into what I do now. That's just the way I hear music. I hear the bass not as a foundation instrument, but more as its own instrument, complementary with everything else, just kind of making the music go in different directions.
Because when you think about the way a lot of the guys played bass in the 80's bands, okay, like let's say for something like Highwire, I mean, you're doing the riff right along with Jake. A lot of bass players would have just wrote an open note, you know what I mean? So you were a lot different.
Well, that was the beauty of being able to play with Jake, is our influences are very similar. We like the same kind of music, the same bands, the same players, and so the way that he heard the bass player for Badlands as being someone that contributed a lot more than just pedaling on the A, and he was very encouraging about that. So in the 80's, bass was performed a lot differently than the way that I performed it, but because I come from the 70's and I wasn't willing to compromise how I play, it wouldn't have mattered who I was playing with. If someone wanted me to dumb it down, I wouldn't do it. As a matter of fact, in the 80's, there were bands that I auditioned for that said, hey, that's really cool, but we would want you to do something much simpler, and I just walked. It just didn't interest me. I wanted to have my musical integrity intact.
So let's go back to 1989, the Badlands debut. Does it blow your mind that people are still talking about this thing? They love it to this day. Does it blow your mind?
I suppose what it really does is it's gratifying to know that people, that it's kind of managed to transcend time as opposed to, be a flavor of the month. I think the music stood the test of time. The players on there, whether it's Ray, who was the best vocalist of his generation, in my opinion, or it was Jake, my all-time favorite guitar player, the riffs that he wrote were pretty timeless. And, of course, both drummers, Jeff and Eric, were great drummers, and then I got to do whatever I wanted. So it was really like the perfect storm for me. So the fact that it still got such a huge fan base it's very rewarding and gratifying.
So I don't think you're on Twitter, but on Twitter, I tweet out a lot of videos and all kinds of crazy stuff, and you'll get reactions, from people. And last night, because I was doing a lot of Badlands listening, research, getting ready for tonight, I sent out a video clip of Dreams in the Dark. And today, right before we started this interview, I looked at it. It had 426 likes and 800 retweets. And I'm telling you, for the videos that I tweet out, that's like super high activity on a tweet. So people are loving it, man. They still love it.
Yeah, it's a shame that, that record sits at about 485,000 copies sold, and if Atlantic ever decides to release it, I'm sure it would go gold within the first couple of weeks, and that would be nice, but our relationship with Atlantic was so contentious that I'm not sure if it'll ever be released, and if it does, I'm not even sure when that would be, but it's just nice to know that people remember it and appreciate it. I became a musician not to be a famous rock star, to be rich. I became a musician for the respect of my peers and to try to create something that would last and be noteworthy. And Badlands basically served all those purposes for me. It was a great band to be in.
A lot of people commented, I'm glad you brought this up because I was going to bring it up. A lot of people say, why is this not on Spotify? So, what is the problem? Couldn't only Atlantic Records benefit at this point from putting this album out there?
We were so against the grain with Atlantic that whatever they wanted to do, we didn't really give a damn what they wanted to do, and we just kind of did what we wanted to do. We kind of, as the saying goes, you live by the sword, you die by it. And I'm fine with that. I mean, and on one hand, I wish it would come out, but on the other hand, I can live with whatever the situation is. I just think that we pissed off Atlantic to a level that, if it came out and sold some units, I don't think it makes enough money for them to be worth it. And I think it's more of them being able to put a dig into us by never putting it out. I mean, obviously we would make some money from it, But again, because neither one of us, whether it's me or Jake, and obviously Ray's not around anymore, our reasons for doing it never had anything to do with the financial benefits of it. It had to do with, this is what we like, and if people like it, great. But, you know, I wouldn't be disappointed if it came out. I just don't know if it ever will.
What's crazy is because you think anybody who was pissed off at you guys, you think they'd be dead by now. You know what I mean? You know, for some big record executive, 30 years later, jeez.
Jason Flom, who was our A&R guy at Atlantic, is now the head of Atlantic.
Oh, okay.
And he's about my age, maybe even younger. So, excuse me, I don't think that. And we did not have a good relationship with him. He hated us. We didn't think much more of him. You know, the whole thing with that, we were on Atlantic, but we were on Titanium as well, which was what kind of like a custom label for Atlantic. And they all took kind of like bets on how many records they thought we would sell between our two managers, Paul O'Neill and John Goldwater, and Andy Sesher, who owned Hit Parader, and Jason Flom. And they all had these double and triple platinum numbers in their head that they thought we would sell. And when we didn't do that, I think they kind of blamed it on us for not towing the line the way that they would have wanted us to do. There were a lot of times we wouldn't do interviews that were scheduled just because we didn't schedule them. They were kind of scheduled for us. So we really bucked the trend, and we really didn't go along with the machinery that they had into place. So like I said, you live by the sword, you die by it. I'm fine with that. I know Jake is as well. But I don't think Andy Sesher or Jason Flom would like to see us get a gold record at some point. And if it ever was re-released, I'm 100% positive we would get one.
Well, that's pretty sad. That's sad, but what are you going to do, right?
You know what? I mean, if I spend all my time worrying about what guys like that think, then I'm wasting my time. It doesn't change anything. Like you said, there's a lot of fans out there that still remember the band and appreciate the band, and I know that myself because of a lot of people who are supporting Kings of Dust are people that I know from Badlands. And when I was in Red Dragon Cartel, the whole idea was, you know, Jake and I back together again from people who were huge supporters of Badlands music. I will say this, if Ray were alive, I could guarantee that me and him and Jake would have done something. I don't know what it would have been, but we would have done something at some point. I mean, the chemistry musically was that strong, and for the most part, we actually got along pretty well. It would be with a different drummer than Eric or Jeff, I'm pretty sure. I mean, obviously Eric's pretty busy, and Eric's pretty busy doing, you know, making like tons of money. But I do know that the three of us respected each other's musical acumen enough that we would have done something else at some point, and I would have been completely up for that.
What happened with Eric Singer? Why did he ended up being out of Badlands?
Yeah, you know, Eric was a great drummer. He wrote great drum parts. I just think that his vision for the band was different than what the three of us were, and you know, I said that, you know, we kind of bucked the trend, you know, and that would have been me and Jake, myself, and Ray really bucked the trend. Eric kind of was more willing to go along with the machine, and I think in the end, it just ended up not being as good a fit. Now, having said that, I wish he would have stayed in the band because I think he was a great drummer and he added a lot to what it is we did. But again, having said that, I was really happy with, you know, Jeff being in the band. Jeff's a great, great drummer, and him and I go back to the early 70s. So, you know, it is what it is. But, I mean, obviously Eric made the right decision for Eric. He's part of a really big machine, and he kind of enjoys the security of that. And I think knowing where things are going with Badlands, you never knew it was going. You would never know what we were going to do from time to time, album to album, tour to tour. It was just kind of whatever we came up with, and a lot of it is whatever Jake came up with. And if it wasn't right down the beaten path, well, so be it. We did it anyway.
You know, it's crazy because now when you think about it, he's out for whatever reason, you know, just things aren't working out. He ends up on Paul Stanley's solo tour, right?
Actually, he was on that. He was on that when we first got together. He had already contracted to do Paul Stanley's solo tour. So when he was in Badlands, he did the solo tour, and then when he left Badlands, first thing he did was Alice Cooper.
Oh, yes, you're right. He was in Alice Cooper. It's hard to keep track of how many bands this dude was in.
Eric's, you know, that's just really kind of, a credit to him how many people he has played with. Because I mean, first time I ever saw Eric play was playing with Lita Ford.
Yep.
So he's played with Gary Moore and Brian May and Paul Stanley and obviously Alice Cooper and Kiss and us, and I'm sure there's some other bands in there as well. I mean, Eric's a very well-versed drummer. He's a very inventive drummer, and he's a great timekeeper. You don't have to pay attention to where he's at all because he's going to be right where he's supposed to be every time.
He seemed really in the zone on that first album, though, because I feel like he had some Zeppelin-ish drums on that one, and I think it fit well. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, and the material, some of our, Ray was a huge Zeppelin-phile, so, some of that rubbed off, and then Jake wrote those riffs, and they definitely had some Zeppelin flavor in there with a lot of other bands as well, but there's definitely, when you listen to Winter's Call or some of that other stuff, it definitely has a Zeppelin vibe to it, and I think Eric was the right guy for that, and he's, he can play that Bonhamy sort of feel, and then even really weird stuff like Devil Stomp, which has a really weird drum beat. There's just a lot of really intricate things that Eric came up with that just made it that much better.
Yeah, I mean, the whole album's amazing. I actually listened to it again last night. It's probably the first time in a long time, and it really blew me away. But one thing I can say is I think Dreams in the Dark is like the perfect first single for you guys, because I feel like it had a little bit of 80s sensibility, right? It had some 70s where you guys were, a lot of that album, had a 70s vibe. And I even thought it was pretty cool, like right before the solo, it's got kind of like that Ozzy chug, that Jake from the Jake era. So it kind of pulled everything together into one song. You know what I mean?
I think actually, I wasn't around when they wrote that song. When we were recording, Atlantic pulled us out of the studio, and Jake and Ray went to New York to write. They thought we needed some other songs, and I do believe that, if I'm not mistaken, Dreams in the Dark was written specifically. That's the one time where we kind of went along with what they wanted. So I do believe that Jake was trying to be, I don't want to say commercial, but a little bit more flexible with what Atlantic wanted, and obviously they got what they wanted. The song, I think it got to number 29, which we never approached that with anything else. Having said that, we never played the song live.
Did you never? Really?
I think we probably played it 7 or 8 times live on the first tour. We had to make the video for it, which took 30-some-odd hours. So by the time we were done with the video, we were going on tour right away, and I think we were just kind of sick of it. And it's funny because in Red Dragon Cartel, I think we played it live more in Red Dragon Cartel than I ever played it in Badlands. It's a great tune. I mean, and I get a lot of comments and compliments on the bass line in that, because it's kind of a off the wall bass line in there as well. So yeah, it's a great track. I've always liked it. But I like everything that we wrote. It'd be hard pressed for me to tell you, if you said which song don't you like, I'd be like, I don't know. I like them all.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great album. And as great as all you guys are as musicians, I'm telling you, it's Ray Gillen's vocals that sell it for me. You know what I mean? I feel like that's the icing on the cake right there.
Yeah, I think it was a perfect band for Ray to be in. He had been in some other bands, he didn't really work out. He'd been in Sabbath, he'd been in Blue Murder, he'd been with I can't remember his name now, the guitar player in Billy Idol.
Steve Stevens.
Steve Stevens. And I think that Badlands, because we were so 70s oriented, I think it gave Ray the perfect vehicle to do what it is that he did best. And I think it really shows. I think Ray sings great on all 3 of the records. As much as the first record is, the most popular of the 3, I actually like Voodoo Highway better than the first one. because I think we really were hitting our stride. We were progressing as a band and as songwriters. Jake was getting to explore more of the influences that he had and the interests that he had. And then even when we did Dusk, which came out, after Ray had passed away, it again kind of showed how we were progressing as a band and songwriters. It's kind of a shame that we never got to see it to fruition.
I kind of think, and you probably think the same way, that anything that he's on is going to sound good for the most part, because I'll give you an example. I never cared much for the 80s, late 80s version of Sabbath or the mid 80s. But when they released those demos with him singing on it, I was like, oh, I like these songs. It was weird, you know what I mean? But like with I think Tony Martin might have been the singer. Not that they're bad, but with Ray on it, it's just a whole other thing,
Well, Tony Martin kind of came in and mimicked what Ray had. Ray had given me a copy of those demos, and I had them for a long time, and I eventually gave them back to him because he lost his. But if you listen to what Ray laid down on there, Tony Martin pretty much covers him faithfully, pretty close.
Yeah.
So, as a matter of fact, if you listen to any of the other Sabbath records with Tony Martin, they don't have that same kind of vibe. Ray had a bluesier bent to him than probably Tony Martin. Nothing against Tony. I think he's a great singer. But it was just, you could tell that he was doing Ray's shtick more than he was doing his own. And then he went off, as they progressed and played on a bunch of Sabbath records, and he got to show his true worth as well. But yeah, I think that that record, what is Eternal Idol, that's one of my favorite Sabbath records.
So let's go to Voodoo Highway. Obviously, another killer album. And I think you kind of touched on this, and what I think too is that, I feel like if there were 80s vibes lingering in the first album, they're kind of gone here. We're kind of progressing. We're getting a little more experimental. Would you agree?
Yeah, and we were never concerned whether we were writing 80s style or anything else. I think the writing on Voodoo Highway is probably even more 70s than the first record.
Yeah, big time. And I think as you start off and they're really solid songs, but then you get midway in the album and I feel like you're starting to really open up and get experimental as well with like 3 Day Funk and Soul Stealer. I mean, he's got a real crazy effect on his vocal. It's killer.
Well, 3 Day Funk and Love Don't Mean a Thing are my two favorite songs on there, but Silver Horse is a great song.
Yep.
Soul Stealer, a song I co-wrote on there, which is Shine On, I really like. And even the stuff, the acoustic stuff that Jake and Ray did, the Voodoo Highway, I can't even remember the names of the songs now. So it really just kind of mirrored where we were at perfectly.
Yes. And even Fire and Rain, I mean, you can't deny that. What a killer vocal performance on that one.
Fire and Rain was an unusual track because when Badlands would go on the road, Jake would make a cassette tape, and it would be all cover songs on it that we would play in our sound checks. We would never play our own material in sound checks. We might play like a few minutes of Winter's Call just to get the background vocals right, but we would just play obscure covers, whether it was Captain Beyond or really obscure Fleetwood Mac or Free, stuff that wasn't on the beaten, so much on the everyone's radar. We would just kind of go off in different directions. And one day at soundcheck, Ray said, "Let's play Fire and Water," which he meant to say. He said, "Let's play Fire and Rain." What he meant to say was, "Let's play Fire and Water," which is a Free song that we played in soundcheck. So when he said Fire and Rain, Jake just started it, and me and Eric just kind of fell in. Me and Eric just kind of fell in, and we kind of did it almost close to the way it is on the record right from the get-go. It was just a real natural thing. So when the time came to record Voodoo Highway, Atlantic wanted us to use a songwriter to write a single, and Jake decided that we should do Fire and Rain as a single, and we did. And, had we not been on Atlantic's crap list, I'm sure it would have been released as a single, and it would have been fairly successful. Little sidebar to that is James Taylor's manager found out we were going to record it, or that we had recorded it, and he sent us a message asking us not to release the song because it was too personal to James, and it was about these very traumatic moments in his life, and he just didn't want a hard rock version of the song out there. So true to Badlands form, we said, yeah, screw you, and we released it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I mean, hey, it's a great song by James Taylor. It's a great song by you guys. It's not going to change anything.
Yeah, it's totally cool. I like James Taylor's version. We would have never been able to play it if all of us weren't familiar with it.
Now,
but it definitely goes its own direction. Jeff's drumming on it is top notch. Again, I get to do anything I want, and Jake and Ray are just stellar on it. It's just a brilliant track.
And when you talk about some of the acoustic stuff toward the end, and that's In a Dream, and I don't know if you knew this or remember this, but I remember we used to watch American Idol a long time ago.
Oh yeah,
and I just be thinking like, what the hell, man? This guy's cool. He knows who Badlands are. He's doing Badlands. I'm sure the producers were like, what the hell?
Pretty much. I got a phone call when it was on saying, quick, turn on American Idol, which I don't watch, and I turned it on and I caught the tail end of him singing it. And actually, through all of that, Bo and I ended up becoming friends on Facebook. And at one point, he wanted Jeff and I to play on some record he was going to do. And I don't know. I think it just maybe fell through. But yeah, it was really kind of cool because it forced people to go back and see what was that he was singing, and a whole other group of people discovered us. So it was real cool.
Yeah, and okay, so after this album, I mean, times are changing in the music industry. Do you think you guys kind of got unfairly mixed into the hairband scene with all the changes, or?
We never paid any attention to it. We just kind of did our own thing, and we weren't really concerned with what anything else was going on. I mean, the one thing that did happen is after Voodoo Highway was out, the whole grunge thing was starting to happen, and I remember we were doing an in-store, and they had Nirvana things hanging from the ceiling, in outro, however you say it, kind of like poster things. And I remember Jake and I sitting there going, we might be in trouble here. And we were. I mean, again, that didn't change what we did. I think the third record, Dusk, would have probably been the heaviest record we would have done, but it had nothing to do with that's just where our head was at the time. That's where Jake was at with his writing. I contributed some to that as well. But we were also kind of estranged from each other as far as Ray and the rest of us. So there were issues that, the record never came out until the late 90s.
Yeah, and I'm sure. I mean, I know it's partly finished and partly a demo, and I'm sure if Ray would have lived, you guys would have went on to do a lot more albums, or at least get that album completely fine tuned.
Yeah, I mean, it was a demo that we went in and we mixed it. I would mix all day, and then Jake would come in and fix whatever he didn't like of mine, and then mix all night, and we just kind of put it out there because there was some interest. The Notorious Badlands third album demo. So a lot of that, Ray doesn't even have lyrics for it. He's just kind of syllabalizing. So had we actually finished it, and there were a couple other tracks that he didn't have any vocals for, it's just kind of him humming along, so we didn't even put them on there. But had Ray, stayed alive, and had we stayed together, I think that would have been a really good album. And again, one of the things about Badlands that I really like is each album is a progression. First album sounds a certain way, second album sounds different, but you could tell it's the same band. The third album would have sounded different again, but still the same band. I mean, Jake never repeats himself. You can even tell that with Red Dragon Cartel. He puts out Red Dragon Cartel, doesn't sound anything like Badlands. It has some of the Badlands vibe to it. And then he puts out Patina, which doesn't sound anything like the first Red Dragon Cartel record. But again, it has some vibe of the way that he writes. So, I mean, we were never going to do the same record twice.
So you guys were managed and produced by Paul O'Neill, and everybody knows him from Savatage, and which ultimately became TSO. But things didn't turn out very well with him. What happened there?
We never liked him anyway. I mean, Ray had a prior relationship with him because Paul O'Neill had been kind of like a gopher at Lieber and Krebs, and Ray was managed with Lieber and Krebs. So when Badlands got together, I think Paul O'Neill probably tried to convince Lieber and Krebs that he could bring Badlands into their stable as far as managing us. So we had actually agreed to let another guy manage us named Larry Mazer. And Ray went back to New York before we signed with Larry Mazer. Larry Mazer managed Kiss and Cinderella. And we'd actually had a handshake deal with him. When Ray came back from New York and said, I don't want to sign with Larry Mazer, I want to go with Paul O'Neill. So it kind of was a sticky situation. We met with Paul O'Neill. He promised us all kinds of stuff. And some of it he delivered on, some of it he didn't. All of a sudden, he's producing our first record, which I'll just say right up front, he doesn't have a lot to do with that. I mean, Jake had way more to do with the production of that record than Paul O'Neill did. It's just that it was agreed that he would have his name on it. And there are some stuff, the way that record was produced, there's multiple takes of every song on that record. When we did Voodoo, there might have been 4 takes max of each song. So our approach was a lot different. It's just what Paul wanted isn't what we wanted. And he didn't like Eric and I. He was never a fan of Eric and I being in a band. He tried to actually get us replaced. At one point, he tried to get Jake replaced. It was complete lunacy.
Wow.
So he was not a friend of mine. God rest his soul. I'm sorry he died. But, one of the happiest days of my musical career was they let me fire him. And I was thrilled.
Now, a few years back, you had cancer, correct?
I did.
Yeah. Everything's good now, though, right?
Yeah, I had stage 4 tongue cancer. I was in Red Dragon Cartel. We were getting ready to go back on the road for 5-6 months, and I had been sick on the whole first tour I was on with them, and so I quit because I knew I was sick, but no one was diagnosing me correctly, obviously, because they were telling me I didn't have anything wrong with me. It was just allergies. And then right before Red Dragon Cartel was going to go back on the road, I quit and I went and found a ear, nose, and throat doctor who actually diagnosed me correctly. I had stage 4 tongue cancer.
Wow.
Kind of like what Bruce Dickinson had, or Tom Hamilton, or I think Mustaine has it, and even Ricky Rocket, same kind of cancer.
What'd you learn from that whole experience?
I learned that being a hard ass at my age was a wasted skill, and that I kind of went through life not really worrying about whether I pissed someone off or not, and sometimes I would go out of my way to be disagreeable. And I learned when I had cancer and they told me I was going to die from it, that maybe I should rethink the way that I had been doing my life. And so I did. I just learned that maybe it's better to be a little bit nicer, to not rock the boat as much. Having said that, I wouldn't change the way we did anything in Badlands, but in my personal relationships, I really had a chip on my shoulder, and I didn't have any problem. If you stepped on my shoe, I didn't have any problem calling you on it. And I learned that someone stepping on your shoe isn't that big a deal.
Definitely. So, I understand.
If that makes any sense.
It does. And we all know, like you said, you mentioned a ton of people. You wouldn't have believed the people I've talked to on the podcast who have lost somebody to cancer, a bandmate to cancer. So, it's a terrible disease. So many of us have been affected by it. But I'm glad to hear that, everything's good with you now. That's awesome.
Well, the thing is, Kings of Dust is a long-term project. We started it 7 years ago. It kind of started out of another band, and then that band ended up kind of breaking up. The guitar player and drummer ended up leaving for their own reasons, and Michael Beck, our singer, who also spent a little time with Red Dragon Cartel, called me up and said, I think the songs that we had were really great. Why don't we find another drummer and guitar player and move forward? So we found the guitar player that we have, Ryan McKay, who's a brilliant guitarist, great writer, great singer, just top-notch guy. And we went through 5 or 6 drummers. And then I we put it on hold because I was going to go out with Red Dragon Cartel for the foreseeable future at that point. Had I not gotten sick, I probably would still be there with them. That doesn't mean I wouldn't have finished this. Well, then when I got sick, I didn't want to even do it. So there's about a 3-year period where Kings of Dust was just kind of sitting there waiting for me to get enough energy to finish it. So out of the blue, I ran into a drummer friend of mine, Jimmy Taft, who I had played with. He's a brilliant drummer. And I said, you need to be in Kings of Dust with me. Matter of fact, I even announced he was in the band before I even asked him to be in it. And so we got together and finished writing the record, and we recorded it. And so if there's one upside to the cancer thing is it kind of put me in a spot where I got to finish the Kings of Dust record. I really like it. If you like that 70s vibe, even a prior work that I've done, I think people would like it. And it's 13 songs. So far, the people that have received the record have the reviews, and there have been some other reviews in other spots that have been off the hook. So right now I'm real happy with it. I mean, I wouldn't wish cancer on anyone, and I certainly wouldn't wish it on me again, but it did have a silver lining. It kind of changed my point of view and also allowed me to finish the record. I mean, the downside is I have some side effects from all that, and I don't play with Jake at the moment, and maybe someday we will play together again. But on the upside, I think if people have a chance to pick up Kings of Dust, I think they'll like it. So if you see it out there, or go find it and give us a shot.
Nice. Now, a lot of people might not know this, but you did a solo album, I want to say it was 1994, and you actually sing on it. And, man, you got a pretty damn good voice. I was surprised.
Thank you. Yeah, I can't sing like that anymore. That was the other byproduct of having cancer, is it screwed up my vocals. So at the time, I mean, I don't really care for my voice, but I kind of had a tenor voice. I always tell people I went from singing like Greg Allman to Billy Gibbons. So I lost a bunch of range off my voice. But yeah, it's a different kind of record than Kings of Dust. It's very bluesy, kind of like really early ZZ Top meets Allman Brothers meets Johnny Winter with some British blues thrown in there too. I like the record. It's a great record. Eric Singer played on it, and me and my school time chum Jim McMillan wrote all the material on there, and it's a good record.
Now, your brother was the bass player in Keel. Whatever happened to him?
Yep.
I never hear much about him anymore.
He's an electrician. He lives here in the Phoenix area. I see him every couple weeks. He plays bass a little bit with just some friends. Nothing professional, just kind of pick up. Gets together with a drummer and guitar player, singer friend of theirs, and they just learn cover songs. Nothing. I don't think they have any intentions of playing out that I even know. I just think that Kenny, has been a bass player since he was in end of high school, and I think I gave him his first bass as a graduation present.
It's kind of funny that you guys are both bass players, because you think of so many of these brother duos, like one's the drummer, one's the guitar, bass. It's funny that you both play bass.
Well, here's the even oddest part. My other brother, Todd, played in Tough.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And he's bass, right?
And he's a bass player as well. As a matter of fact, he still plays in Tough when they go out and play. I don't know how many shows they do a year, a dozen or half dozen. He still goes and plays with them.
Oh, my God.
So, yeah, all three of us are bass players. It's, Kenny and I have tried to do a couple things where he plays bass and I play drums, or he plays bass and I play guitar, but it's just never really worked out. Kenny's work schedule is pretty intense. He usually has to leave for work at 2 or 3 in the morning, and he's a supervisor for a commercial electrician company. So chances of getting something solid together with Kenny, unless he retires at some point, probably isn't going to be happening anytime soon. And Todd lives in Cleveland, so last time I saw Todd, I was in Red Dragon Cartel and playing at the Agora in Cleveland.
Do you feel like in some situations, let's just say with the Keel situation and your brother, I mean, at this point, I mean, you get to a certain age. I mean, do you think you're just better off having like a stable job with health insurance? I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, I guess as I get older, this is how I'm thinking. As glamorous as it is, as it sounds, to be out there in a band, I mean, sometimes there's things you just need. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, for me, when Badlands was coming to an end, you know, I had made some money from my solo record, and we were going to come back to Phoenix to buy a house. And the thing for me that was kind of the final nail for me was I didn't want to be gone. My son had just been born, and I'd missed maybe the first 9 months of his life while I was on the road. So you know, at one point Jake and I were going to, he wanted to put another band together again after Badlands with me and him, another drummer and another singer. And I was totally down for that, but I would have wanted it to be something that would fit into my schedule better so that I could be around to raise my son. And, you know, he's 28 now. And so I didn't really miss being on the road. I wanted to raise my daughter, who's now 21. So I didn't really miss doing that. And Jake also had a daughter at the time, and I think he wanted to spend a little more time at home as well. So had we done something, I think that we would have tried to have our cake and eat it too. I would have probably had some kind of other job while I was still playing in a band. It just so happened with me moving to Arizona that made it too tough for us to get together. When he called me to be in Red Dragon Cartel, one of the reasons I wanted to do it, I mean, I wanted to play with him again, first of all. And second of all, my children were now grown, and they'd never seen me in that setting. They'd seen me playing like cover bands or whatever. They'd never seen me playing at the Whiskey or at some of these other places. So I wanted them to experience what had happened in my life before they were born. And because of social media, I was even more, I don't know whether the word is popular, but I was more well known after I was in after I was in Red Dragon Cartel. I was more well known because social media was so intense. So they got to experience all that. So it was actually really cool.
So last question. You know how Queen found Adam Lambert, okay? Let's just say you get the original guys from Badlands and you find some prodigy who can pull off Ray's music. You in for a reunion?
You know, I would tell you, yeah, I am. However, Jake has always said that there would never be a Badlands without Ray. So I would kind of go with whatever he came up with. If Jake called me and said, hey, we're going to go do such and such a shows, we're going to use this singer and we're going to call it Badlands, I'd say, okay. Or if it was going to be, hey, we're going to go out and do the music of Badlands as, you know, Jakey Lee does the music of Badlands, I'd probably be down with that. I don't know where he's at on that. I've never actually discussed it with him. He just, you know, we're really, really good friends and always have been. So he knows that I'm there, you know, short of illness whenever he needs me. And that's cool. But I mean, on the other hand, Kings of Dust will go do some shows here at some point. We're looking at doing a dozen or so dates in, Texas and Oklahoma right off the bat. We'll probably go up to Nebraska too. We've had some other offers to do dates. We're just trying to see whether we can string stuff together. I don't think we'll go get in a tour bus and go for 2 or 3 months, but I could see where I definitely know we are going to go do some shows at some point. There's a talk about us possibly going to Japan to do some shows and even to Europe for a bit for some festivals and that. So, I'm all for playing with Jake again, but I'm having the time of my life playing with these guys. And to be perfectly honest, right now, Kings of Dust is my priority. I want to see what it can turn into. And I don't have any delusions of grandeur, but I'm very proud of it. And I think that once we get out and play live, I think people will like it. And I think once they hear the disc, they will also like it.
Well, hey, great conversation, Greg. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
That was a great interview with Greg, but now it's time to talk about the Kings of Dust album. Now, I wish I could have had this CD before the interview because we would have talked a lot more about it because I freaking love it. It's a great hard classic rock album. I've listened to this for a month in my car back and forth to work and whatnot, and it really just gave me the old vibe of the 80s and 90s getting to know an album, not just some quick stream and then you move on. That being said, this album doesn't just grow on you, it takes you over. I really don't want to mention one song being better than another because every song is great on this. It's a cohesive set of tunes. But I will mention a few tracks here. It's split with melody-driven songs like My Peace of Mind and Mama, and it has a lot of riff-driven tracks like What's the Other and the track Wolves. The musicianship here is top-notch, and I would especially say that this is Greg's most elaborate and nasty bass lines ever. The production sounds like a live show, not some condensed, computerized crap. They have a very unique sound, but I know that people want to hear comparisons, so here you go. If you take Zeppelin, Sabbath, Deep Purple, Van Halen, Kiss, Queensryche, Badlands, and Alice in Chains, and you blend them all up, you might get something that's close. So go figure it out for yourself. Go buy it. The links are all in the description. So we've got to give it a rating here. So we figure everything's always fire on the 80's Glam Metalcast, so we use a torch rating. 5 torches will be a perfect album, and I give this one 5 torches. So go check it out. You're gonna love it. Rock on!
How the heck do you combine Alice in Chains, Van Halen, Kiss, and whoever you said?
That's what I hear.